Robert Durst's story begins in a world most people only dream of, a world of unimaginable wealth, influence, and family power. Born on April 12, 1943, in New York City, Robert was the eldest son of the Durst family, heirs to one of Manhattan's most powerful real estate dynasties. The Dursts weren't just rich, they were legendary in the New York property scene. Their name was synonymous with skyscrapers, high-rise apartments, and commercial buildings that dominated the Manhattan skyline. To outsiders, the Dursts represented success, sophistication, and an enviable lifestyle. But beneath the polished surface of wealth, there were cracks that would ultimately shape Robert into one of America's most infamous figures. From a young age, Robert was surrounded by extreme expectations. His father, Seymour Durst, was a formidable man, a visionary in real estate with an iron will. Seymour was known for his meticulous attention to detail, his insistence on control, and his belief that the Durst name must remain untarnished. He expected his children to uphold the family legacy, to carry the Durst name with pride, and to contribute to the empire he had helped build. But Robert, as the eldest son, felt the pressure more than anyone. While his younger siblings seemed to navigate these expectations more smoothly, Robert often struggled to fit the mold. Even in childhood, Robert displayed a temperament that set him apart. He was highly intelligent but socially withdrawn, and his personality was often described as cold, calculating, and unusual. Friends and acquaintances remembered him as polite but distant, charming but unpredictable. In a family where appearances mattered above all else, Robert's introverted nature and occasional rebellious streak were seen as troubling. Some family insiders suggested that he resented the attention and approval his father lavished on his younger brother, Douglas, who was considered the more capable and reliable heir to the Durst empire. This sense of being overshadowed, combined with a desire to assert his own identity, would simmer quietly for years, laying the groundwork for future turmoil. The Durst family household itself reflected the extremes of their world. Lavish parties, grand Manhattan apartments, and elite social circles were part of daily life. Robert was exposed to luxury, privilege, and the influence that wealth could command. Yet, wealth did not shield him from the psychological pressures of growing up in such a high-stakes environment. He lived in a world where image mattered more than truth, where mistakes were carefully hidden, and where every action could be scrutinized. For a young man like Robert, who already had an obsessive and secretive streak, these pressures would become a defining influence on his character. Robert's education further reflected the family's high expectations. He attended elite schools, where he excelled academically but remained socially awkward and isolated. He had a keen mind for analysis and strategy, skills that would later aid him in evading law enforcement and manipulating situations to his advantage. But he also showed early signs of detachment and an inability to form lasting emotional connections, traits that would haunt him as his adult life unfolded. In a world where his family could buy almost anything, Robert seemed to seek control over people and situations in ways that money alone could not satisfy. By the time Robert entered adulthood, the combination of immense privilege, family tension, and a restless, enigmatic personality had begun to shape his worldview. He was a man accustomed to power and influence, yet he was deeply isolated. While he could navigate the upper echelons of New York society with charm and sophistication, he often did so from a place of calculation rather than genuine connection. Observers noted a disturbing duality in his character, a man capable of appearing refined and civilized in public, yet harboring impulses that were dark, secretive, and unpredictable. It was in this gilded, high-pressure environment that Robert Durst began to exhibit the traits that would define his later life: intelligence, cunning, charm, and an extraordinary capacity for manipulation. He had the tools to succeed in business and society, but he also carried within him a simmering resentment, a desire for control, and a detachment from moral constraints. These qualities, nurtured by wealth and reinforced by family dynamics, would become the foundation for the bizarre and twisted path his life would take. In many ways, Robert Durst's early life was a study in contrasts: privilege and isolation, power and insecurity, charm and coldness. The world he grew up in provided him with every material advantage, yet it also created the perfect storm for the dark, shocking chapters that would later dominate headlines. To understand Robert Durst, the millionaire murderer who captivated and horrified the world, one must first understand the family, wealth, and pressures that shaped the man behind the headlines. The next chapter in Robert Durst's twisted story begins with a woman whose life, and disappearance, would haunt him for decades, Kathleen McCormick Durst. Kathleen was more than just Robert's wife, she was a young, ambitious woman with a bright future in medicine. Born and raised in the United States, she had recently completed her medical education and was eager to build a career in a field dominated by men at the time. She met Robert Durst in the late 1970s, drawn to his charisma, wealth, and sophistication. For a brief period, their relationship seemed like the perfect union of privilege and ambition. However, behind the facade of glamour and high society, cracks in their marriage began to appear almost immediately. Robert's behavior, secretive, controlling, and emotionally distant, created tension in the household. He had a tendency to withdraw for long periods and often acted in ways that left Kathleen isolated and frustrated. Friends and family noted that Robert seemed obsessed with control and secrecy, traits that would later define his criminal actions. Meanwhile, Kathleen was independent and strong-willed, unwilling to submit entirely to the whims of her husband. This clash of personalities set the stage for a relationship that was anything but ordinary. In January of 1982, Kathleen McCormick Durst vanished without a trace. She had been living in the couple's New York home and was last seen going about her daily routine. When she didn't return home, her family initially assumed she might be out of contact or traveling, but days passed, and concern grew. Her disappearance sparked confusion, fear, and eventually, suspicion. The police were called in, but with no body, no witnesses, and no clear signs of foul play, the case quickly became complex. Robert Durst, as Kathleen's husband, was naturally one of the first people investigators questioned. While he claimed ignorance about her whereabouts, his behavior during the investigation raised eyebrows. Friends and relatives described him as strangely calm, almost detached, which contrasted sharply with the fear and panic most people would exhibit in such a situation. Some accounts suggested that Robert's reactions were cold, calculated, and unsettling, fueling suspicions that he might know more than he admitted. Over the years, theories about Kathleen's disappearance ranged from voluntary disappearance to murder. Some speculated that she had fled due to marital tensions or personal struggles. Others believed that Robert, driven by the same manipulative and controlling tendencies that would later define him, had orchestrated something far more sinister. The absence of concrete evidence allowed Robert Durst to evade serious scrutiny for decades, a pattern that would repeat itself in other tragedies connected to his name. Adding to the mystery, Robert's life following Kathleen's disappearance was marked by strange behavior and attempts to distance himself from the situation. He moved across the country, changed identities, and appeared in public with little reference to his missing wife. Friends who had once been close to him described a man increasingly detached from reality, yet capable of masking his inner turmoil with charm and composure. The disappearance of Kathleen McCormick Durst was more than a missing person case, it was the first public glimpse into a mind that could manipulate, deceive, and evade consequences with frightening skill. Even decades later, Kathleen's disappearance remains a central thread in the story of Robert Durst. Her fate loomed over him like a shadow, influencing his decisions, relationships, and ultimately, the crimes that would make him infamous. The mystery surrounding her vanishing would only deepen as subsequent murders and bizarre events unfolded, linking Robert Durst inextricably to a web of deception, suspicion, and chilling intrigue. The story of Kathleen McCormick Durst's disappearance is not just a tale of a missing person, it's the starting point of a saga that would shock the world. It revealed the first signs of Robert Durst's dark, secretive tendencies, his ability to manipulate those around him, and the lengths he would go to protect himself. It set the stage for a lifetime of bizarre behavior, crimes, and courtroom drama that would make his name infamous in true crime history. As the shadow of Kathleen McCormick Durst's disappearance loomed over Robert Durst, another name would enter the story, Susan Berman. To many, Susan was a successful, glamorous, and charming socialite. She was also Robert Durst's close friend and confidant, someone who had been a constant presence in his life for decades. But by the year 2000, Susan had become more than just a friend. She was a keeper of secrets, a woman who allegedly knew details about Kathleen's mysterious disappearance. Susan's life, like Robert's, was steeped in sophistication and wealth. She was the daughter of a Las Vegas mob-connected casino developer, and she had carved out her own identity as a journalist and socialite. She lived in Beverly Hills, mingling in elite circles, and was widely admired for her charm, wit, and intelligence. Yet beneath the surface, Susan Berman carried knowledge that would prove dangerous, connecting her to a story she could never walk away from, the dark and secretive world of Robert Durst. By December 2000, Susan's life would come to a shocking and tragic end. She was found dead in her Los Angeles home, a single gunshot wound ending her life. The crime scene was chilling in its simplicity, no signs of forced entry, no struggle, just the eerie calm of a murder that seemed personal, deliberate, and calculated. Law enforcement quickly suspected foul play, but the connection to Robert Durst was not immediately clear to the public. What made Susan's murder particularly disturbing was the context surrounding it. Investigators later revealed that Susan had been worried about a manuscript she was working on, one that might reveal secrets about Kathleen McCormick Durst's disappearance. Friends reported that she had expressed fear about the implications of what she knew and the potential consequences of disclosing it. In essence, Susan Berman had become a living threat to Robert Durst, a threat that, for reasons chillingly clear in hindsight, he chose to eliminate. The murder of Susan Berman marked a turning point in the public perception of Robert Durst. Unlike Kathleen's disappearance, which left only suspicion, Susan's death was a tangible, brutal act that demanded attention. Law enforcement slowly began to piece together the connections, noticing patterns of secrecy, control, and manipulation that mirrored Robert's past behavior. Susan's murder was not random, it was strategic. It reflected a man who, when cornered or threatened, would take extreme measures to protect himself and his carefully constructed life. For years, Susan Berman's murder remained unsolved. Her friends and family were left with grief, confusion, and the haunting knowledge that someone close to her had betrayed her trust. Meanwhile, Robert Durst continued to live a life that seemed almost untouched by the growing web of suspicion surrounding him. His ability to evade consequences, maintain charm, and move freely reinforced the chilling perception that he was calculating, detached, and above the law, or at least capable of manipulating it to his favor. It would take years, and the intervention of unexpected circumstances, for the truth about Susan Berman's murder to begin surfacing. Eventually, law enforcement, coupled with the sensational documentary, The Jinx, would reveal the depth of Robert Durst's involvement, connecting him definitively to Susan's death and exposing the chilling reality of a man willing to kill to silence those who knew too much. The murder of Susan Berman was more than a tragic loss, it was a signal. It revealed a side of Robert Durst the world had only glimpsed before, a man who could charm, manipulate, and deceive, yet also commit cold, calculated murder without remorse. It was a turning point in a life already marked by mystery, laying bare the dark, twisted reality of the millionaire who would shock the world. By the early 2000s, Robert Durst's life had become a series of increasingly bizarre and violent events, but none would be as shocking, or as publicly scrutinized, as the killing of his neighbor in Texas. In December 2001, Robert found himself in Galveston, Texas, far from the glitz and privilege of New York and Los Angeles. Here, he would commit a crime that seemed to define the paradoxical nature of his life, calculated yet chaotic, shocking yet methodical. The victim, Morris Black, was a quiet man living in the same neighborhood as Durst. The circumstances that led to their fateful encounter are still debated, but what unfolded next would become one of the most infamous episodes of Durst's criminal life. Robert claimed that the killing was in self-defense, insisting that Morris had attacked him. But the aftermath of the incident revealed a pattern of behavior that was chillingly consistent with Durst's past: secrecy, evasion, and a disturbing lack of remorse. What made this case particularly bizarre, and media-grabbing, was what Durst did after the killing. In an act that stunned investigators and the public alike, he dismembered Morris Black's body, disposing of it in Galveston Bay. The gruesome details shocked law enforcement and the nation. Many saw this act as evidence of a cold, calculating mind, capable of committing murder and then attempting to erase all traces of evidence, as if he were trying to rewrite reality itself. Despite the horrific nature of the crime, Robert Durst's trial in Texas would take an unexpected turn. Incredibly, he was acquitted of murder, though he was convicted on lesser charges related to the dismemberment. This outcome baffled the public and highlighted Durst's remarkable ability to evade the full consequences of his actions. Observers were left grappling with a troubling question: how could a man implicated in multiple deaths walk free, seemingly untouched by justice? The Texas killing and subsequent trial showcased Durst's paradoxical persona. On one hand, he was capable of extreme violence and moral detachment; on the other, he could present himself as calm, rational, and even sympathetic in court. His legal defense was masterful, leveraging inconsistencies in witness testimonies and procedural loopholes, allowing him to sidestep a murder conviction. To many, it was an astonishing demonstration of both cunning and audacity, solidifying Durst's reputation as a man who seemed to operate above the law. But beyond the legal drama, the killing revealed something deeper about Robert Durst's character. His life was increasingly defined by isolation, paranoia, and manipulation. He had shown an ability to charm friends, allies, and even strangers, yet he simultaneously cultivated a secret world in which he could commit unspeakable acts without immediate consequence. The Galveston incident was not merely a crime of opportunity, it was the latest chapter in a life shaped by privilege, secrecy, and a dangerous detachment from morality. In retrospect, the Texas killing was a turning point. It marked the moment when Robert Durst's pattern of violence could no longer remain hidden behind wealth, charm, and social status. Though he avoided a murder conviction, the incident left an indelible mark on law enforcement, journalists, and the public. It was a clear signal that Robert Durst was a man who operated on his own rules, an individual whose combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and secrecy would continue to shock the world in the years to come. By the time 2010 rolled around, Robert Durst had become a fugitive in the court of public opinion. His life, marked by mysterious disappearances, unsolved murders, and bizarre behavior, had fascinated journalists, law enforcement, and the general public alike. But it was an unlikely medium, a documentary series, that would finally bring him back into the harsh glare of scrutiny. That series was the critically acclaimed HBO miniseries, The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. The Jinx was designed to explore Robert Durst's strange, convoluted life. Filmmakers Andrew Uretsky and Mark Smerling gained unprecedented access to Durst, interviewing him over months and capturing footage that would ultimately become key evidence in his arrest. What made the documentary so compelling, and chilling, was Durst himself. Charismatic, intelligent, and disarmingly casual, he discussed his life, relationships, and suspicions with a calmness that belied the horror connected to his name. Viewers were captivated, not just by the facts of the crimes, but by the unsettling ability of this man to talk about them with almost casual detachment. The documentary traced Durst's involvement in multiple high-profile cases, including the disappearance of his wife, Kathleen McCormick Durst, and the murders of Susan Berman and Morris Black. Through interviews, archival footage, and investigative work, The Jinx painted a portrait of a man both brilliant and terrifyingly cold, a man who lived a life of privilege while hiding a dark and violent streak. For the audience, it was the ultimate true crime unraveling, but for Durst, it would prove to be the beginning of the end. What made The Jinx truly groundbreaking was a series of revelations captured on camera. In the final episode, Durst was recorded in a series of private moments, unaware that his microphone was still on, making statements that appeared to acknowledge his involvement in the crimes. The most infamous moment came when he muttered to himself, "What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." This chilling confession, though uttered privately, was inadvertently recorded, and its broadcast sent shockwaves across the world. Audiences watched, horrified, as a man who had eluded justice for decades seemingly admitted to multiple murders in his own words. The impact of the documentary was immediate and profound. Law enforcement officials, armed with renewed public interest and evidence from the series, moved swiftly. In 2015, just weeks after the finale aired, Robert Durst was arrested in New Orleans, Louisiana. The charges? First-degree murder, stemming from the killing of Susan Berman, as well as other ongoing investigations related to his history of suspicious deaths and disappearances. The HBO series didn't just expose the crimes, it revealed the psychology of a man who had lived a life in constant evasion. Durst was meticulous, strategic, and calculating, but he also possessed a hubris that ultimately became his undoing. By participating in the documentary, he underestimated the power of media and public attention, believing he could charm, manipulate, or evade scrutiny even under the watchful eyes of professional filmmakers. The Jinx stands as a landmark in true crime storytelling, not just for its cinematic approach, but for the real-world consequences it produced. It demonstrated the power of media in uncovering hidden truths and brought a man who had long lived above the law into the hands of justice. For Robert Durst, the documentary was both a mirror and a trap, a mirror reflecting his chilling past, and a trap from which he could no longer escape. The capture of Robert Durst following The Jinx marked one of the most remarkable chapters in true crime history. A man who had evaded suspicion for decades was finally brought to justice, and the world watched in disbelief as the enigmatic, wealthy, and dangerous millionaire faced the consequences of his dark and twisted life. After decades of evading justice, Robert Durst finally faced the full force of the legal system. His arrest in 2015, following the explosive revelations of HBO's documentary, The Jinx, was just the beginning. The world watched as a man who had lived a life of wealth, privilege, and secrecy now had to confront the consequences of his actions. The trial of Robert Durst would become one of the most sensational and widely followed true crime cases in modern history. The central focus of the trial was the murder of Susan Berman, Durst's longtime friend and confidant. Prosecutors presented a damning narrative. Berman had been silenced because she knew too much about the disappearance of Durst's wife, Kathie McCormick. The prosecution argued that Durst, in his quest to protect himself and maintain his carefully constructed life, had committed murder with chilling calculation. Over weeks of testimony, the courtroom became a stage for both revelation and spectacle, as prosecutors laid bare the details of his past crimes and manipulations. The evidence against Durst was extensive. Investigators highlighted inconsistencies in his past statements, his bizarre behavior following Kathleen's disappearance, and the circumstances surrounding Susan Berman's death. Forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and even clips from The Jinx were presented to show a man who had lived a life of deception and manipulation, ultimately culminating in murder. The chilling video footage of Durst muttering to himself, seemingly confessing, became a pivotal moment, reinforcing the prosecution's claim that this was a man capable of committing calculated, cold-blooded crimes. Throughout the trial, Robert Durst's behavior was a study in contrasts. On the stand, he was calm, measured, and articulate, projecting an image of control and rationality. Outside the courtroom, media coverage painted a different picture, a man with a complex personality, blending charm, arrogance, and an unsettling detachment from reality. Observers were captivated, horrified, and fascinated, watching a man whose life had been a bizarre mixture of wealth, violence, and secrecy finally facing public scrutiny. In 2021, after a lengthy and highly publicized trial, the verdict was finally delivered. Robert Durst was convicted of first-degree murder in the killing of Susan Berman. The courtroom erupted in shock and disbelief, and the public reaction was equally stunned. For decades, Durst had seemed untouchable, able to navigate the legal system, media scrutiny, and even suspicious deaths without consequence. His conviction marked the culmination of a lifetime of evasion, manipulation, and murder, proving that even the wealthiest and most cunning individuals could ultimately be held accountable. The conviction of Robert Durst sent ripples through both the legal world and popular culture. It was a stark reminder that privilege and wealth do not grant immunity from justice. The bizarre twists and shocking revelations of his life, from the disappearance of his wife to the murder of his friend, and even the gruesome Texas dismemberment case, captivated audiences and fueled countless documentaries, news specials, and books. People could scarcely believe the extent of his crimes, and the conviction only amplified the horror and fascination surrounding his story. Durst's life and trial left an indelible mark on true crime history. His combination of intelligence, wealth, and a chilling lack of conscience made him both terrifying and captivating. The public watched a man who had eluded justice for decades finally held accountable, and the shocking details of his life, his manipulation, murders, and bizarre behavior, ensured that his story would be remembered for generations. In the end, the trial and conviction of Robert Durst were more than just a legal conclusion, they were the final chapter in a saga that shocked the world. A millionaire, a manipulator, and a murderer, Durst's life had been a series of bizarre twists and dark secrets. The public, law enforcement, and true crime enthusiasts alike would never forget the story of the man who lived in privilege, committed unspeakable crimes, and ultimately faced the consequences of his actions in a courtroom that exposed the chilling truth for all to see.